Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a really pivotal moment. China, after Mao Zedong's death in 1976.
Right. His leadership spanned decades, shaping the country in profound ways. His passing really left China asking, well, what next?
Exactly. Big questions about politics, about the economy. So our mission today is to look at the key figures, the major events that really steered China in the years that followed.
It's a period of huge transformation and, honestly, quite a bit of uncertainty, lots to unpack.
Okay, so let's start with Mao himself, leader of the Communist Party. He had this vision centered on peasant equality, revolutionary spirit.
And this belief in sheer hard work to drive the economy. He set up these massive agricultural cooperatives, right?
And communes. But the thing is, they kind of eliminated the incentive for individuals to produce more.
If everyone gets the same outcome regardless of effort, well, it often dampens productivity. That's what the data tends to show,
And he also tried to sort of replace traditional family life with these communal structures.
which was a huge social upheaval.
Yeah.
And then, layered on top of that, you have the Cultural Revolution.
Ah, yes. Launched to purify the revolution, get rid of anti-revolutionary ideas.
But it proved incredibly destructive. It caused immense turmoil, chaos, and really eroded trust in the party leadership for many.
So when he died in 76, there was this legacy of, well, economic challenges and social disruption.
Definitely. A real need for stability and a new direction.
Now, someone who was trying to navigate this even before Mao died was Zhu Enlai. He was premier for a long time, from 1949 right up until his own death, also in 76, just before Mao.
Zhu was often seen as a more pragmatic figure. He apparently tried to put the brakes on some of the radicals during the Cultural Revolution.
And in the early 70s, under him, China entered a slightly more moderate phase.
That's the picture, yeah. He was getting worried about China being so isolated internationally.
And he started signaling maybe a willingness to connect with the West.
Exactly. Which leads us to that famous moment in 71.
Ping-pong diplomacy. Inviting the American table tennis team. I mean, that was the first American group visit since 1949.
Incredible, isn't it? Such a simple gesture, but politically it was huge. It really cracked open the door.
It kicked off a whole new era in U.S.-China relations, didn't it? Paving the way for, well, for what came next.
Absolutely. It set a precedent for dialogue and engagement.
Okay, so Zhu passes away, then Mao, and eventually Deng Xiaoping emerges as the dominant leader by around 1980.
Right. Deng, another veteran of the revolution, a Long March survivor, which gave him significant clout within the party.
But he had different ideas about the economy, didn't he? More moderate, even willing to try things that looked a bit capitalist.
Precisely. He wasn't bound by the same ideological rigidity, perhaps. He saw the economic stagnation and was willing to experiment. He championed the four modernizations.
Okay, the four modernizations, that was his big plan.
Yeah, basically a set of goals focusing on upgrading agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology. A blueprint for, well, modernizing China.
He called his economic reforms the Second Revolution. So what did that actually look like on the ground?
Well, a big one was getting rid of those unpopular communes. Instead, land was leased back to individual farming families.
Ah, so bringing back that individual incentive we talked about.
Exactly. And food production went up significantly as a result. People had a direct stake in their output again.
And beyond farming.
He allowed small private businesses to start up. State-owned industries got more leeway, more freedom to make decisions.
And critically, opening the door wider to the outside world.
Yes, welcoming foreign technology, foreign investment. That was a major departure from the Mao era's self-reliance focus.
So these economic policies, they really started changing daily life for people.
Oh, definitely. Incomes rose for many. People started buying things like washing machines, televisions. There was more exposure to Western culture, music, ideas.
Which Deng kind of acknowledged, right? He famously said, opening the window lets in fresh air, but also some flies.
Yeah, he understood that economic opening would inevitably bring in Western political ideas and influences, too. He saw it as a calculated risk, it seems.
A risk worth taking for the economic benefits.
Apparently so, in his calculation. But before Deng could really consolidate and push these reforms, there was that other little piece right after Mao's death, the Gang of Four.
Right, the radicals, including Mao's widow, Jiang Qing. They tried to hold on to power.
They did, advocating for continuing the more radical Maoist policies. But the moderates, likely with military backing, moved against them quickly.
They were arrested, jailed.
Yes, and that move was crucial. It basically removed the main opposition to a shift away from the Cultural Revolution's policies and cleared the path for leaders like Deng.
So the radicals are out, Deng's reforms are rolling, the economy's changing, people are seeing new things, getting new ideas.
And that economic liberalization starts to create, perhaps, an appetite for other kinds of change. Political change.
Which brings us, tragically, to Tiananmen Square in 1989.
A pivotal and deeply somber event. You had students, initially over 100,000 of them, occupying the square in Beijing.
Protesting for democracy, right?
Yeah.
And against corruption, against dictatorship.
Yes. And it wasn't just students. It gained huge popular support. Some estimates say maybe 1 million people joined the protests at their peak. They were calling for dialogue, for reform.
Some even called for Deng Xiaoping himself to resign.
Which was a direct challenge, a very bold move. The government clearly felt threatened.
And their response was decisive and brutal. Deng declared martial law.
They brought in the troops. Over 250,000 soldiers surrounded Beijing.
And then, June 4th, 1989.
The army moved in. Heavily armed soldiers, tanks. They stormed the square. There was gunfire.
Hundreds were killed, possibly thousands. Many, many more were wounded.
It was a violent crackdown on overwhelmingly peaceful protests. A real shock, both domestically and internationally.
And it signaled the start of a broader suppression, didn't it? Arrests followed, estimates around 10,000 people.
Yes. The government clampdown was severe. And their public stance was quite different from what observers reported.
They denied a massacre occurred, right? Claimed they were just putting down a riot by criminals.
Which really underscored the limits of political reform. The party showed it was willing to use overwhelming force to maintain control, even as it pursued economic opening.
It demonstrated that economic liberalization didn't necessarily mean political liberalization would follow, at least not on the protesters' terms.
Exactly. It highlighted that fundamental tension.
Yeah.
How do you modernize economically, engage with the world, but maintain strict one-party rule?
So wrapping this up, it's a complex story. After Mao, you have this brief moderate period under Zhu, paving the way somewhat. Then Deng takes charge, launches these massive economic reforms, the four modernizations, ditching communes, embracing markets to some extent.
Which brought undeniable economic growth, raised living standards for millions, changed the face of China.
But that very opening, that exposure to new ideas, also fueled desires for political change, for more freedom, culminating in Tiananmen.
And the government's response there really drew a line in the sand about the limits of political dissent.
So the challenge for China's leadership became managing this balancing act. Economic progress versus political control, meeting aspirations while maintaining stability on the party's terms.
It's a balancing act that, in many ways, continues to shape China today. The choices made in that post-Mao era cast a very long shadow.
It really does. And thinking about that, here's something to ponder. Given how much economic change was allowed, what might China's global role, its internal dynamics, look like today if those calls for political reform back in 1989 had been met differently? It's one of modern history's huge what-ifs.
A fascinating question.
Yeah.
It really pushes you to think about alternative paths and their potential consequences globally and domestically.
Definitely something to reflect on.
Yeah.
Okay, to help you process everything we've covered in this deep dive, here are a few questions to consider.
First, what were the key differences in the economic philosophies of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping? How did they fundamentally differ in their approach?
How did Zhu Enlai's actions, particularly his opening towards the West, maybe set the stage for Deng's later reforms?
What were the main drivers behind the student protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989? What were they asking for?
What exactly were the four modernizations aiming to achieve for China? What were the specific areas of focus?
And finally, what does the Tiananmen Square incident and the government's reaction reveal about the challenges and perhaps the limits of political change in post-Mao China?
Great questions to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.